I remember the first night the family came out to the state park campground, new tents still smelling of nylon, marshmallows and hot dogs packed in the cooler, and the parents wearing the kind of smiles that said, "We're doing this for the kids." The sun had dropped behind the pines, and the last of the other campers' laughter drifted off as fires burned low. The little ones were tucked in, their giggles slowly turning to soft breaths while the cicadas started their night song. You could feel that mixture of excitement and unease that comes with your first night in the wild, when the dark feels thicker and every sound seems to have meaning. At first, it was peaceful. The crackle of their small fire, the distant call of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the faint breeze. Then came the sound, soft, almost curious. A high, clear whistle that didn't seem quite natural. It wasn't a tune exactly, more like something testing the air. The father looked up from his folding chair and frowned. "Hear that?" he whispered. The mother nodded, her hand tightening around her mug. The whistle came again, closer this time, steady and deliberate. 3 short notes, then a pause. They told themselves it was just the wind in the trees, or maybe a bird unsettled by their firelight. But the sound persisted, circling the edge of their camp. Once, it came from the left, then behind them, then faintly from the other side of the tent. Always the same pattern, 3 notes, a pause. When the father finally stood to look into the trees, his flashlight cut through drifting smoke, catching only mist and the pale bark of birch trunks. Nothing moved. He swallowed and forced a grin. "Probably a nightjar," he said, though his voice carried more question than certainty. The kids stirred at the noise, half awake and asking if everything was all right. Their parents soothed them, zipped the tent shut, and climbed into their sleeping bags. But the sound didn't stop. It began to mimic things, a low hum like a person trying to remember a melody, a rustling that seemed too rhythmic to be wind. The mother whispered, "It's not an animal." The father didn't answer. He was listening too intently, counting the seconds between each whistle, realizing it moved in a slow circle around them, as if tracing the camp's perimeter. When it fell silent at last, the absence of it was worse than the sound itself. The woods seemed to hold its breath. The only noise was the ticking of cooling coals. They lay there in the dark, listening, waiting, unsure if the thing outside had gone, or was simply listening back. When the father woke again, the lantern had burned out and the tent was wrapped in a deep grey silence. For a moment he thought he'd dreamed the whole thing. Then came the sound again. Soft at first, a faint whistle just beyond the nylon wall near his head. 3 notes, pause, then another set, this time so close it made the fabric shiver. He held his breath, straining to hear footsteps, twigs, anything to explain it. But there was only the quiet, the smell of damp earth, and the steady breathing of his wife and children beside him. He shifted slightly, careful not to wake the kids. His wife's hand found his arm in the dark. "It's back," she whispered. Her voice was tight, like a bowstring. "Don't go out there." He wanted to say he wouldn't, but some part of him felt he had to see. It wasn't courage so much as that gnawing, irrational need to know. Fear of the unknown is a strange thing. It grows in the imagination until it becomes worse than anything that could actually be waiting outside. He unzipped the sleeping bag, slow as he could. The zipper's teeth sounded loud in the stillness. Another whistle answered it. 3 notes again, but drawn out like a mocking echo. He froze. The shape of a shadow moved past the tent, breaking the faint silver glow from the moon. Not tall like a bear, not on 4 legs, like a deer. It seemed to glide, and there was a faint click, click, click that followed the movement, mechanical and irregular, like metal tapping against stone. The mother sat up now, wide-eyed. "Please don't," she whispered as he reached for the flashlight. The sound had shifted to the other side of the tent again, as though circling. Their youngest whimpered in his sleep, stirring. The father's hand shook as he turned the light off again. The thought of unzipping that tent flap, of breaking that thin barrier between safety and the vast black forest, felt impossible. Minutes passed. Maybe 10, maybe 30. Time stretched thin and strange. Then came a new sound, a voice, faint, raspy, and uncertain. "Hello?" It was a human word, but wrong somehow, drawn out in a way that made the hair on his neck rise. The voice came from just beyond the tent. "Heel, Lou!" The parents stared at each other, every muscle locked. He almost called back. Almost. But something deep inside him said not to. That word hadn't sounded like a greeting. It had sounded like a question being learned. The night pressed in. The forest gave no clue. And when silence finally settled again, they didn't dare sleep. They simply lay there, side by side, waiting for dawn. Dawn came slow and colourless. The forest washed in mist and pale gold. The father was the first to stir, his neck stiff and eyes gritty from a sleepless night. The kids were still bundled in their bags, and his wife was staring at the tent ceiling, as if afraid to look outside. The world beyond the fabric was utterly still. No bird calls yet. No rustling of leaves. Just that uneasy hush that comes after something's passed through the woods. He finally unzipped the tent flap, inch by inch. Cold air slipped in, heavy with dew. Outside, everything looked normal. The fire pit was a pile of grey ash, the camp chairs slightly damp, but something about the clearing felt off, though he couldn't have said why at first. It was the footprints, at least what might have been footprints. Small depressions in the soil, too shallow to show detail, moving in a strange looping pattern around the tent. Not animal tracks, not boots either. More like someone had pressed rounded shapes into the ground with careful, deliberate rhythm. His wife joined him at the entrance, rubbing her arms against the chill. "You see it too?" she asked. He nodded, scanning the tree line. No motion, no sound. Just the fog curling through the branches. The memory of that mechanical clicking echoed in his mind. Sharp, unnatural. He half expected to hear it again from somewhere deep in the pines. They tried to make it seem normal for the kids. Breakfast over the tiny burner, a few jokes about how noisy the woods had been. But both parents kept glancing toward the forest edge, pretending they weren't listening for the whistle. Every now and then, the father thought he saw something glint in the brush, like a reflection, but when he looked harder, it was gone. "Maybe it was some kind of bird," his wife offered. Her voice was light, but her hands trembled when she poured the coffee. "Or someone else camping nearby." The father nodded, though he knew there were no other sites within a half-mile. He'd checked when they arrived. The ranger had even mentioned how quiet the place usually was, that most people preferred the lake loop. By midday, the sun burned off the mist, and the forest started to sound alive again. Squirrels, jays, the buzz of insects. The children ran off toward the creek to throw pebbles and catch frogs, laughing as though the night had never happened. Their voices seemed to pull the day back to normalcy. Still, when the father followed them to the water's edge, he noticed something in the mud. A faint, thin mark, like a dragline, curving down from the forest toward the bank. He crouched, tracing it with a stick. It ended abruptly at the water, as if whatever made it had gone in or come out. The woods were beautiful that morning, but they no longer felt friendly. And the father, though he smiled and joined the play, couldn't shake the sense that they hadn't been alone out there. That evening, as twilight bled through the trees, the family tried to convince themselves it was just another night in the woods. The kids were tired from their day of exploring, the parents weary from pretending to be brave. They cooked dinner over the fire, macaroni bubbling in a small pot, the smell of wood smoke clinging to their clothes, and tried to talk about the stars they'd see once it got dark. But underneath the chatter, something in the silence of the forest felt waiting. The birds quieted early. Even the crickets seemed uncertain, their chirps scattered and thin. The father couldn't stop glancing toward the line of trees beyond the firelight. He wanted to believe that the night before had been nothing more than nerves, his mind playing tricks in the dark. But when the breeze shifted, it brought with it a faint metallic scent, like rust or old water pipes. The mother noticed it too. "Let's turn in soon," she said softly, not wanting the children to pick up on her unease. They banked the fire low and crawled into the tent, the familiar sounds of zippers and rustling sleeping bags doing little to settle their nerves. For a while, it was quiet. just the kids breathing evenly the soft pop of cooling embers. Then, sometime after midnight, the sound returned. 3 whistles. Clear, sharp, paused, then 3 again. The same cadence as before. The mother's hand found his in the dark. "It's closer," she breathed. The father nodded, already reaching for the flashlight. He hesitated. The memory of that voice, drawn out and wrong, made him freeze, but when the youngest stirred and whimpered, he knew he couldn't just wait. He unzipped the tent an inch, then another. Cold air poured in, carrying a smell of wet moss and something faintly sour. The beam of his light swept across the clearing, nothing but mist and trees. Then, just at the far edge of the campsite, something flickered. Not movement exactly, but reflection. A pair of glints like eyes, catching the light for a heartbeat before vanishing. He blinked hard. When he looked again, there was only darkness. The clicking began next, slow and uneven, like pebbles striking each other in rhythm. It circled, same as before. The father felt his pulse hammering in his throat. "Hey!" he called out before he could stop himself. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the forest. The clicking stopped instantly. Then, from the trees, "Heel, low!" The voice was closer this time, shaped almost right. It came again, softer. "Hell, whoa!" The mother pulled him back inside, whispering, "Don't answer it." They huddled there, flashlight still on, its beam trembling across the tent walls. Outside, the woods were utterly still. Not even the wind dared move the leaves. The hours that followed crawled by, heavy with the kind of silence that hums in your ears. The flashlight dimmed, flickering now and then against the nylon walls, but neither parent dared switch it off. The children slept, in uneasy spurts, whimpering softly, unaware of the way their mother's nails dug into their father's sleeve each time a twig cracked outside. The voice didn't come again, nor the whistle, nor the clicking. Just stillness. And that was almost worse. When at last the first streaks of dawn touched the tent, they stepped outside together. Every inch of the clearing was wet with dew, silvered in the early light. The forest looked ordinary again, impossibly calm, as if the night had never happened. But something new lay in the dirt, just where the whistle had seemed to come from last. A small, flat stone, perfectly round, with a neat hole drilled through its centre. No other rocks like it anywhere nearby. It was cold to the touch, colder than the morning air, and when the father tilted it, faint scratches along the edge caught the light. Tiny, parallel marks, as though something had scraped against it again and again. They broke camp in record time. The kids chattered sleepily, helping roll sleeping bags and pack the cooler, unaware of the tension humming through their parents. By the time the sun had fully cleared the trees, their car was loaded, and they were back on the gravel road toward the highway. Only when the forest finally fell away behind them did the mother exhale and look over her shoulder at the now empty stretch of pines. "Do we tell the ranger?" she asked quietly. The father shook his head after a long pause. "What would we say? That something talked to us?" He tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "They'd think we were tired or crazy." The children were soon asleep in the back seat. The road wound through valleys and meadows, sunlight glinting on distant lakes. Yet, even as they left the park far behind, the father couldn't stop hearing those 3 notes in his head. Whistle, pause, like a memory that refused to fade. And sometimes, later that summer, when the windows were open at night and the wind slipped through the screens, he'd swear he could hear a faint echo of it again. Maybe it was just imagination, he'd tell himself. Maybe fear has its own sound when it settles too deep. But part of him knew that the woods had listened too, and once something learns your voice, it never quite forgets.